Alright, in this video, I'm going to be like kind of comparing and discussing now the Bible and the Quran. Like this is gonna be the Bible versus the Quran. It's a very interesting the Bible, King James Version, the King James Version Bible versus the Holy Quran, Abdullah Yusuf Ali. Now, before I begin, the Bible and the Quran, there's a bunch of different versions of the Bible, right? The Protestant Bible, the Catholic Bible, but I got the King James Version, and I think this is the Protestant version, I don't know as well. Blah blah blah. The Bible, yeah, there's different types of Bibles, but I just got I think it's the Protestant version and it's the King James Version. And there's obviously the Quran, there's different translations, but I got Abdullah Yusuf Ali. And let's see now the differences between these very important religious scriptures and holy texts. So first of all, the Bible is the King James Version, the Protestant version, I don't know. It is 601 pages long. So So the Protestant King James Version of the Bible is 601 pages long. I don't know if you can properly see that with this camera. So if you were to read the Protestant King James Version of the Bible, you're going to have to go through 601 pages. And the Quran, 601. And the Quran, the Abdullah Yusuf Ali translation, at least the Abdullah Yusuf Ali translation. I mean, maybe because the Quran is more typical standard. There's not like many versions of the Quran. There's just translations and stuff. I don't know. Typically, like at least the one that I have, the Quran is going to be about 362 pages long. So the Bible is 601 pages long. The King James Version and the Protestant version. And the Quran is 362 pages long. So 601 pages for the Bible and 362 pages for the Quran. So the Quran's a lot smaller than the Bible in that way, especially if we're talking about the King James Version, the Protestant version. There's other versions of the Bible that could be more smaller than this type of Quran that I have. I don't know, but that's kind of like the thing that you'll notice immediately is that the Quran's just a lot more, I guess, in my opinion, the Quran is just so much easier to read than the Bible because it's not that dense. It's not really, the Quran isn't that dense as in terms of literature. The Quran is like a breeze to read through because it's like a lot more, it's basically more straightforward and stuff like that. It's more brief, it's smaller, it doesn't really get too much into the nitty-gritties of too many different types of historical events or something, or lineages and genealogies and stuff. I don't know, lineages, genealogies and stuff like that. Compared to the Bible, the Bible is kind of like a headache. Not only is the Bible a lot bigger than the Quran in terms of page numbers and stuff, in terms of the amount of pages in this book. There's more pages in this book, obviously, than the Quran. At least this is the King James Version. The King James Version, Protestant version, blah blah blah. This type of Bible, this Bible compared to this Quran that I have is a lot. There's more pages in this Bible than in this Quran. And this Bible, the Bible, if you try and read the Bible, it's sort of like a headache because the Bible just gets too much into the nitty-gritty details. Of all the biblical prophets, their genealogies and lineages. It goes into too much detail on these things. I don't know. you could just read through the Bible yourself, the genealogy part. So especially if you're reading the Old Testament, that's like very typical, just to kind of to go over like the genealogies of so many different types of people and prophets and biblical prophets and blah blah blah. The Bible is so much more it's more frustrating to read because it gets too much into the nitty gritty of too many unimportant things. I don't know, like the genealogies of different people and blah blah blah. Maybe that is important, I don't know. Obviously, the Bible's a lot more dense. There's just more words in the Bible than in the Quran, I think. Especially the Protestant King James version of the Bible, I don't know. It's a lot more, it's way harder to like read through the Bible than it is to read through the Quran. That's like the first thing I would tell you about, right? Especially in this King James version. In the King James version, there are, let me just double check. 601 pages in this King James version. This Bible, King James version Bible. You see that? 601 pages in the King James version of the Bible, which is probably the Protestant Bible. I don't know. I'm kind of lost on that. The Quran is more brief and easy to read through. You just try reading through the Bible and the Quran. You know what I'm talking about. The Quran just reads so much better. I don't know. It's not just me being biased because, a Muslim Pakistani guy. I don't know. The Quran just reads a lot more and better. I don't know. I encourage you to try and read through both of these books yourself, the Quran, the Bible and the Quran. Try reading through both of these religious scriptures and texts on your own. I'm telling you, from my experience, this reads it's so much easier to read through this than it is to read through this. You have to really if you want to read the Bible fully, because I read the Bible completely 2 times over, right, when I was a younger teenager. Man, it's very painful. You have to literally force yourself to read through the Bible. It's super painful. Okay, so other than the amount of pages and stuff, the amount of stuff in each holy scriptures, like the amount of the number of pages in each holy scriptures and books and how big they are and like blah 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 and stuff like that. Yeah. So other than what I've already said, like what else? Yeah. So again, the Quran is so much easier to read through the Quran. I don't know. It's not just me being biased because all of Muslim Pakistani guys. Try reading through the Quran and not just the Quran. I mean, I'm mixing it up here. Try reading through the Bible and the Quran on your own. Try reading through both religious scriptures on your own, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, this is so much easier to read than this, because the Bible gets too much into like so many different nitty-gritty details. And okay, so other than all of this, what else? Okay, so let's now want to get more onto what about what's inside of these books? Isn't that more important? What's mentioned inside of these books? I was reading through the Bible, the Old Testament, blah blah blah. Specifically, I know there's some weird stuff in the Gospels, but if you read through the Old Testament, there's a lot of weird, kooky things. And I came across so many disturbing verses in the Old Testament, the Bible. King David, he was collecting like the foreskins of his enemies and kind of using them as like a currency. I don't know. It's so when you read through the Old Testament, it's so weird and nasty like that, man. All these biblical prophets were obsessed with foreskins. They were cutting their enemies' foreskins off and collecting them like currency and using them as like a trading item and stuff and giving them to each other. Foreskins, like that was so important in the Old Testament. It's kind of very disgusting. And of course, the Old Testament God, Yahweh, Adonai, Jehovah, like he does so many despicable things in the Old Testament. He commits a lot of genocides, Noah's flood story, blah blah blah, and all this type of stuff. A lot of us should be familiar with the Bible and like a lot of the Old Testament and stuff and what's said in the Old Testament. A lot of these Old Testament stories, like that, Noah's flood story, obviously that's in the Quran as well. There's like a lot of overlap between the Bible and the Quran because they're Abrahamic scriptures. They come from like the same source, I think. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, because actually maybe not, because like Islam's about Muhammad. It's not really fully about Muhammad, but Muhammad is like the person that kind of was inspired and stuff to kind of dot down the Quran. It kind of does somewhat. Actually, I take that back, because if you read through the Bible just talks about like a lot of the Old Testament biblical prophets. I don't think Muhammad is really mentioned a lot in the Quran. The Quran just kind of it discusses the biblical prophets. Actually, that's actually something that you would like be kind of blown away with once you start reading the Quran. That Muhammad, you would expect, because Muhammad wrote the Quran, so it'll be about Muhammad a lot. No, it isn't. It's typically a lot of it's about the biblical prophets, and of course Allah and stuff. And Allah, the deity in Islam, Allah, his or it's like it's kind of like its characteristics and judgments. Like the Quran, it mostly focuses on Allah's majesty. I don't know how else you would put that. And the biblical prophets, yeah, I don't think Muhammad's really mentioned a lot in the Quran. I mean, maybe Islam. Muhammad's really, if you want to read, if you want to, I don't even know. I believe even Muhammad's life story isn't mentioned in the Quran, which is kind of bizarre. A lot of people would think that the Quran is it's all about Muhammad's stuff and what Muhammad did in his life and blah blah blah. But that's in a separate piece of literature called the Hadiths. The Hadiths. Got Sahih Al-Bukhari. A lot of because typically a lot of people would assume that shush man, the Holy Quran. A lot of us would assume that it's all about Muhammad. Muhammad is the central character in this book. It all goes around Muhammad and stuff. The book Holy Quran, but that's not true. Muhammad is not even his life story isn't even mentioned, I believe, in the Quran. I think so. I might need to double check on that. I might be wrong a little bit. There could be some things mentioned about Muhammad in the Quran, but mostly it's not really about him. It's more about the biblical prophets and Allah's majesty and stuff like this. Muhammad's life and stuff like that and story. All the details about Muhammad, all the nitty gritty stuff is in a separate piece of literature called the Hadiths. Sahih al-Bukhari is the most popular one. Bukhari. Muslim Quran. Yeah, that's something else. The Bible and the Quran, there is a lot of overlap between them, because the Bible talks about the lives of the biblical prophets. The Quran kind of does discuss that as well a lot more. I don't believe the Quran even goes too much into detail about Muhammad's affairs and his life and stuff like that, because you would assume that the Quran would be talking about Muhammad a lot, but it's not. I don't think it's like that. Muhammad is only really discussed in detail in the Hadith literature, which is completely separate. So that's kind of because a lot of people might have that misconception that the Quran is just going to be about Muhammad doing his thing and stuff and blah blah blah, and him going around places and doing stuff. It's not like that, because the Quran doesn't even discuss Muhammad a lot. It's more about the biblical prophets as well, and Allah's majesty and stuff like that. And it talks about the Day of Judgment and stuff, which is kind of a common theme. But back to the Bible, the Old Testament and stuff. The Bible, the Old Testament. If anyone's read the Bible completely in a lot of different times, you can back me up, right? That the Bible, there's so many different insane things in the Old Testament, man. In the Old Testament, the Old Testament God, Yahweh Adonai, the biblical God, the biblical Old Testament God, he's so bloody, man. He does so many insane things. He literally commits a lot of different genocides and stuff like that, and it's kind of just insane. And you can just you can just kind of do some research on this on your own in the Old Testament. There's so many different insane verses in the Old Testament, so many different instances of the Old Testament biblical God committing genocides and killing people for very petty reasons. And what's also weird is a lot of these biblical prophets, they were collecting foreskins and doing other weird things. Even Moses and stuff like that. There was also on him, Numbers 31:18. I don't know about that. You can look into that. I'm not gonna show you it, but you can look into it. That's kind of very disgusting. Sex slavery and stuff. The Bible's, the Old Testament, a lot of the biblical prophets were obviously engaging in war and stuff like that. They did a lot of despicable things. You can just do all the research on that on your own. I don't need to waste your time with that in this video. But I'm just gonna kind of just review. It's like a comparison between the Bible and the Quran. Now onto the Quran. The Quran doesn't really have it's not as insane as the Bible, which is kind of you would expect it to be the other way around, that the Quran would be more violent and insane than the Bible, but it's not really. There's more bloody stuff mentioned in the Bible than in the Quran. The Quran it reads, not only does it read better, it's more wholesome. I don't know if that's the right word. there's not as much bloody stuff mentioned in the Quran than there is in the Bible. Which is kind of funny. I think you can go onto Google and like there'll be like websites that will kind of discuss this. Like there's more like violent stuff mentioned in the Bible than in the Quran. That's kind of it's oxymoronic. I don't know, because there's kind of this like big misconception that Islam's like a violent religion and the Quran is just like a violent religious book and stuff. It teaches us to be violent and stuff like that. It's kind of very it's oxymoronic. It's kind of funny as well. And the Bible is more violent, at least from because I read the Bible 2 times over. I'm telling you, it's like a lot more bloody, man, compared to the Quran, which and if you're having a lot of doubt, I mean, if you read through both religious scriptures on your own, like, a lot of you might be saying, oh, this guy is just being biased and dumb. If have you read both of these religious scriptures on your own? I read both books multiple different times. I can tell you that the Bible is like more insane, more violent, more bloody compared to the Quran. And you can go and do your own research and conduct like your own type of experiment, read through both books, both pieces of literature, and then come to your own conclusion on your own. This is more, way more bloody, more insane, more like gruesome compared to the Quran. You can do your own research on this. You don't need to just take my word for it. I can't show you like all the instances and stuff. I can't like show you all of like the different parts of the Bible that are despicable and disgusting, and all the parts of the Quran and stuff like that. I'll take too much time on this video. I don't want this video to be like 8 hours of me like carefully showing you like different pages of the Bible and the Quran. I don't want to do that. You can do your own type of research. I'm just going to give you like my opinions on this. The Bible is a lot more bloody and gruesome compared to the Quran. That's just from what I've read in mine, because I read the Bible 2 times over, specifically the Old Testament. Way more gruesome and bloody, man. If you can like, there should be like a bunch of websites that you can go through on the internet, and you can kind of find this out for yourself, that the Bible is indeed a lot more bloody than the Quran. Bloody, violent, gruesome, blah 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 blah. This is like it's like such a big misconception that the Bible is more wholesome than the Quran. The Quran is like a violent book, but it's the other way around. The Bible is more gruesome, more violent than the Quran. The Quran is more wholesome and stuff like that. It's kind of oxymoronic. It's kind of weird. Isn't that kind of funny that this is more wholesome than this? This is like because of the misconception that Islam is like about terrorism and stuff. It's kind of funny, man, that the Bible is more gruesome and violent and insane than the Quran. And that's just okay. So that's like, so far I mentioned that the Bible is like, it's more dense, it's harder to read compared to the Quran, and it's more violent and insane compared to the Quran. What else? And really, I don't really have a lot more to say, because the Quran, it just discusses a lot, because the Bible and the Quran, they're Abrahamic scriptures. You know what I mean? Abrahamic kind of, supposedly they go to the same source. Obviously, there's a couple of differences between these books and pieces of literature, but they come from the same source supposedly. If you believe in the Abrahamic God, I don't know. If you read through the Quran, again, there's like a misconception that the Quran is about Muhammad and stuff in his life and blah blah blah. There's not a lot. The Quran doesn't really talk about Muhammad too much. There's more. It talks more about the prophets, the biblical prophets, blah blah blah, and the Day of Judgment, Allah's majesty and stuff like this. Muhammad's more like, if you want to know more about the details of Muhammad's life, it's found in like a separate piece of literature called the Hadiths, like this, called Sahih al-Bukhari. That's like such a big misconception that you read the Quran, this is going to be about Muhammad's life and stuff. Why would I bother reading about Muhammad's life, his life story? Why would I care about that? Like it's not really about that. It's not, the Quran isn't really too much about Muhammad. I don't think there's even like, it's not really even about Muhammad. It's more, what's very insane is it just goes over the biblical prophets. It's like, it kind of like summarizes the lives of the biblical prophets. I don't know if it summarizes it. I don't know. It talks about the biblical prophets and stuff. Obviously in a little bit different way than the Bible, but I don't know. It isn't Muhammad's life. I'm telling you, if you start reading the Quran, you're going to be reading the lives of the biblical prophets and stuff like that, and stuff like that, and like a bunch of like stuff about Allah's majesty and stuff. And the Day of Judgment, blah blah blah. Muhammad's life. You're not going to hear too much about Muhammad in the Quran. That's so weird, because his Quran is it's just going to be about Muhammad. Why would I bother reading that? It's not. It's going to be more about the biblical prophets, blah blah blah. If you want to know about Muhammad's life story, you have to read like the Hadiths, which is kind of like funny. That's kind of very funny. You have to read the Hadiths, not the Quran. The Quran doesn't talk too much about Muhammad, which is kind of very funny and weird. The Quran talks more about the biblical prophets and stuff like that, and the Day of Judgment and Allah's majesty. I don't even think there's like too much, like even like, yeah, I don't believe there's any type of like, obviously it does talk a little bit about Muhammad. Obviously there are some like, there's some bits about Muhammad's life and stuff, but the Quran doesn't really go too much into detail about Muhammad's life. It's more about the biblical prophets and Allah's majesty and Day of Judgment and stuff like that. So anyway, yeah, so the Bible is a lot more dense compared to the Quran. It's a lot harder to read compared to the Quran because the Bible goes into all the nitty-gritty details and genealogies and lineages and stuff, and you can find this out on your own. It goes into like all the technical details of so many different things, and it's kind of very hard to follow through on that, and it's kind of a headache. The Quran is like a lot more brief, easier to read, straightforward. It doesn't go too much into the nitty-gritty, and I like that. And this is just my like kind of like a review and like a versus video of the Quran, of the Bible and versus the Quran and stuff. The Quran's more straightforward, easier to read. It doesn't go too much into the nitty-gritty details like the Bible. The Bible is so, one of the things that makes it so hard to read the Bible, it's like it goes into the nitty-gritty details. Anyway, other than that, yeah, the Bible is also more insane compared to the Quran. It's more violent, especially if we're only discussing the Old Testament. The Old Testament is quite very bloody and gruesome and violent, and it's like somewhat, it's kind of like not very wholesome. Like the biblical prophets, King David collects foreskins of his enemies. That's kind of disgusting. Why would like a biblical prophet collect foreskins of his conquered enemies? It's kind of very disgusting and sad. Yeah, it's got the Bible is just kind of it's kind of very gruesome. It's more gruesome compared to the Bible, the Quran. The Bible is more gruesome compared to the Quran. The Quran is a lot more wholesome, easier to read. I know it's just like, oh, Muslim Pakistani guy being biased. No, it is more wholesome and easier to read. It's just more straightforward. You're probably gonna have a lot of doubts anyway in this video because a lot of us are not very intellectually honest. But you can read through both pieces of literature on your own in your own free time, spare time, and you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll instantly connect these things in your head. You'll know what I'm talking about. So, and that's like my versus video of the Bible versus the Quran. The Quran comes out on top in my opinion. It's easier to read, more straightforward, not as gruesome and violent and as insane compared to the Bible. I would rank the Quran higher and more above the Bible and stuff because it's just a better, I feel like it's just a better piece of literature to read. I don't know, that's just my opinion though. You would have your own opinions and you can kind of read both pieces of literature on your own and stuff and come to your own conclusions and stuff. But anyway, that's about it. And I do hope you do like read through both pieces of literature on your own and you can kind of come to your own conclusions. Do like kind of compare both texts on your own in your own spare time, in your own free time. But again, this is just my opinion. The Bible is harder to read than the Quran. It goes into too much of the nitty-gritty details. The Bible is more gruesome and violent compared to the Quran. The Old Testament has a lot of insane things in it. There's like so many different insane things in the Bible. There's like websites that you can go on, like Old Testament genocides. You can type these types of things in onto Google and blah blah blah, and you'll like come like you can. I think there might be even like some type of website that compares like the genocides and violent stuff mentioned in the Bible compared to the Quran. The Quran is like so much more wholesome, man. It sounds so weird to say that because it's like there's misconception that Islam's a violent religion, but the Quran is like a lot more wholesome than the Bible and stuff, and yeah, that's about it and stuff. Overall, I believe the Quran is a better like piece of literature to read. I don't know. The Bible is like more dense, more tougher to read, more frustrating. It's got more violent stuff in it. It has you're gonna have to read about so many different insane things that are that are gonna be kind of mentally scarring. But I encourage you to read through both pieces of literature on your own in your own free time and come to your own conclusions, and that's about it.